Billy the Kid is remembered as a cold-blooded killer who murdered one man for every year of his life. The reality is that he was an orphaned teenager caught in a war between wealthy merchants. Subscribe, because we're going to reconstruct who he really was and how he actually died. Number 1. Everybody's heard of Billy the Kid, the most famous gunslinger in the Old West. But there's one thing almost nobody knows. That was never actually his real name. He was probably born Henry McCarty around 1859, and not in some dusty little town in New Mexico, like a lot of people imagine. He came from New York, all the way across the country, the son of Irish immigrants. Over the course of his short life, he changed his name more than once, trying to stay one step ahead of the law. At one point, he went by William H. Bonney, and that's the name many people still know him by today. So where did Billy the Kid come from? He didn't come up with it. The newspapers of the time did. While sheriffs tried to hunt him down across the territory, reporters realized that this young outlaw sold newspapers like few others. Every robbery, every shootout became a front-page headline. And that's how, through ink on paper and word of mouth in saloons, a kid with several names ended up going down in history with a nickname that, in the end, wasn't even his. Number 2. Alone in the world before he was even 15. Imagine losing everything before you even became a man. In 1874, tuberculosis took Billy's mother, Catherine, in a small town in New Mexico. His father had been out of the picture for a long time, and his stepfather had no interest in raising the boy. Overnight, that kid was left completely alone in the world. No family, no money, and no one to give him a roof over his head or a plate of food. Back then, if you had no one on the frontier, you had to fend for yourself, or you wouldn't last long. To survive, the boy took whatever work he could find. It didn't take long before the law came knocking. At around 15, Billy was arrested for the first time for a petty theft, the kind of thing someone does when they're hungry and out of options. But here's the detail that already showed how tough he was. Instead of sitting behind bars and waiting, the kid found a way to escape. He climbed up the jailhouse chimney and disappeared into the darkness. And that's how, escaping from a cramped cell, the story of one of the most famous outlaws the Old West ever saw began. Number 3. The first killing was almost an accident. A lot of people think Billy the Kid was born killing, but the real story is different. His first killing came out of a fight nobody had planned. In August 1877 in Arizona, he was still just a skinny young guy known as Henry Antrim, a long way from the legend he would later become. That night, at a saloon near Camp Grant, Billy ran into Frank "Windy" Cahill, a big blacksmith who was always giving the kid a hard time. Cahill liked humiliating him in front of everyone, shoving him around, cursing at him, and treating the boy like a punching bag. But this time, things went too far. The blacksmith threw Billy to the ground and went after him. Cornered, with nowhere to go, Billy pulled his revolver and fired. Cahill died the next day. It was the first time the young man's name was connected to a killing, and it was far from the last. Before the law could get their hands on him, Billy got on his horse and disappeared into the desert. Right there, at just 17 years old, that skinny kid became a real fugitive. Number 4. He got caught up in a real war, and not by choice. In late 1877, a young man just over 18 named Henry McCarty, who the world would come to know as Billy the Kid, found work on a ranch in Lincoln County, New Mexico. His boss was John Tunstall, an Englishman who treated the kid almost like a son. The problem was that the region was controlled by a group of merchants who ran everything: the stores, the cattle, the money, and even the local law. Anyone who went up against them usually paid the price. When Tunstall tried to open his own business and break that monopoly, he became a target. In February 1878, men tied to the rival faction killed him in cold blood on a deserted road, and he was unarmed. That death changed Billy forever. He joined a group known as the Regulators and swore to hunt down the men responsible. It wasn't for fun or a thirst for fame. It was revenge for a man he respected. That's how the Lincoln County War began, and that's how the legend that would follow Billy for the rest of his life was born. Number 5. Tunstall's death changed everything. Pay attention to this. Before becoming the most feared outlaw in the Old West, Billy the Kid was just a young man working for an English rancher named John Tunstall. The fight was over money and power. Two factions were battling for control of business in the county, and Tunstall was on the side that was getting under the skin of the powerful men in town. In February 1878, men tied to the rival faction ambushed Tunstall on a deserted road and killed him in cold blood. They say Billy arrived shortly afterward and found the body of the only man who had believed in him lying on the ground. At that moment, just over 18 years old, he made a vow. Whoever pulled the trigger was going to pay. That's how what history calls the Lincoln County War broke out. Billy joined a group called the Regulators and went after every man involved in that killing. What a lot of people don't know is that many of the deaths tied to his name didn't come from robberies or bar fights. They came from that revenge. Billy wasn't killing just for the sake of killing. He was settling a score that to him was personal. Number 6. The pardon that was promised but never delivered. It was 1879. Billy the Kid was cornered with the law on his trail because of the killings during the Lincoln County War. That's when New Mexico Governor Lew Wallace quietly made him an offer. If the young man testified against the other gunmen in court, he would get a full pardon and walk free. The two even met face-to-face by candlelight to shake hands and seal the deal. Billy kept his end of the bargain, gave up names, and told them everything he knew. But the promise turned to dust. Wallace turned his back, the deal fell apart, and the kid went right back to being a hunted man with a price on his head. And here's the part almost nobody would expect. While deciding the fate of an outlaw, that same governor was spending his free time writing a book that the whole world would one day know. The title? Ben-Hur. That's right, the man who turned his back on Billy the Kid ended up creating one of the greatest classics of his time. Number 7. He killed 4 to 9 men, not 21. Everybody's heard the same story. Billy the Kid supposedly killed 1 man for every year of his life, reaching 21 before dying at 21. It's a nice round number, easy to remember, and it's completely false. When historians went looking through the actual records, they found something very different. William Bonney, his real name, probably took the lives of 4 to 9 people. And a good number of those cases happened during group shootouts in the middle of the chaos, where no one knew for sure who had fired the fatal shot. So where did the number 21 come from? Cheap biographies written shortly after his death. The authors realized that the more blood they put on the page, the more books they sold. They inflated the body count, created the legend of the gunslinger who never missed, and the public bought it. The truth is simpler. A dangerous young man, yes, but one who was turned into a monster by the press of the time. Number 8. The Lincoln Jail Escape. In April 1881, Billy the Kid already had a date set to die. A jury had convicted him of murder, and he was supposed to hang within days. But the 21-year-old had other plans. On the 28th, with his wrists handcuffed, Billy asked to use the bathroom. On the way back, he managed to get hold of guard James Bell's gun and shot him. Bell went down right there. There was still the other jailer, Bob Olinger, who was across the street. Billy went to the window, waited for the man to come closer, and shot him with his own shotgun. 2 men dead in a matter of minutes. After that, he had an assistant remove his shackles, picked a horse, and rode off right in front of the whole town, with no one brave enough to stop him. It became one of the most talked-about escapes in the entire Old West, told and retold in newspapers from coast to coast. But his freedom didn't last long. Less than 3 months later, Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked him down and brought Billy's run to an end once and for all. Number 9. Pat Garrett killed him in the dark. It was the night of July 14, 1881, in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Sheriff Pat Garrett had once been a friend of Billy the Kid, but now he was after him with an arrest warrant. That night, he went to Pete Maxwell's house looking for clues about the young man's whereabouts. He sat on the edge of Maxwell's bed in the dark and talked quietly with him. What Garrett didn't know was that Billy was right there on the same property. At that same moment, hungry, Billy walked into the room to cut himself a piece of meat. He noticed someone sitting in the dark and asked in Spanish, "Who is that?" Garrett recognized his voice right away. There was no time for anything else. He pulled his revolver and fired twice. The first shot hit him right in the chest. Billy fell to the floor and died right there, with no chance to fight back. He was only 21 years old, the most wanted man in the Old West, with a $500 bounty on his head, was taken down in the dark by a bullet he never saw coming. Number 10. The man who killed Billy the Kid also wrote the book that turned the outlaw into a legend. In 1881, Sheriff Pat Garrett ended the young outlaw's life in New Mexico. The following year, he published a biography about him, but much of the text was actually written by a journalist named Ash Upson. What was supposed to be the true story turned into a collection of made-up tales. Garrett inflated the number of killings, invented shootouts that never happened, and portrayed Billy as an almost superhuman gunslinger. The book sold well, and the myth took hold for good. But Garrett's life ended in a strange way. In 1908, near Las Cruces, he was shot on a deserted road while traveling by horse-drawn carriage. A man named Wayne Brazel confessed to the killing, claimed self-defense, and walked free in court. To this day, no one knows for sure who pulled the trigger or the real reason behind it. In the end, the outlaw hunter became a victim of the same kind of violent death he had helped spread across the Old West. Number 11. The only photo that became worth a fortune. Stop and think about this for a second. There's only one real photo of Billy the Kid in the entire world. Just one. It's a tintype, that old kind of portrait made on a metal plate, taken around 1880, when the young man was still alive and being hunted by the law all across New Mexico. For more than 100 years, that image passed from hand to hand, almost forgotten, until someone finally realized what they had. In 2011, the photo went up for auction. And here's the part nobody saw coming. A collector paid $2.3 million for it. All that for a small piece of metal with an outlaw's face on it. Why so much money? Because that photo was the proof. It was the only way to know what Billy really looked like. To this day, historians argue over every detail: the look in his eyes, his posture, the crooked hat, the gun strapped to his belt. Everything we know about what that man looked like came from that single plate that survived the test of time. Number 12. Imposters claimed to be Billy the Kid for decades. Sheriff Pat Garrett said he killed Billy the Kid on a dark night in 1881 in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, with 2 shots in the dark. End of story? Not quite. Almost 70 years later, an old man from Texas named Ollie Brushy Bill Roberts showed up swearing that he was Billy himself. According to him, the man who went down that night was someone else, and he had been living in hiding all that time. He even asked the governor for a pardon, showing scars he claimed were from bullets, but nobody bought his story. And he wasn't the only one. Another man, John Miller, told a similar story before he died. So you might think, just do a DNA test and settle it, right? The problem is that every attempt to open the grave and compare the bones ended up getting blocked in court. Local authorities stepped in, citing legal issues, and some people said it was to avoid hurting tourism. The result? To this day, no one knows for sure who is buried there, and the Old West was left with one more mystery.